Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies and I'm host of this weekly podcast. And this week, we'll be delving deeply into two timely topics. First off, I'm bringing in our tennis media rights expert, Maria Kolodova, and our global news editor, Martin Ross, to talk all about Australia's Summer of Sport, and specifically the Australian Open, the first of the year's 4 tennis Grand Slams. We'll discuss the new deals that underpin Tennis Australia's media rights portfolio, alongside an overview of bigger picture finances and a look at sponsorship revenues. Then, Jonathan Rest, Sport Business Global News reporter, is going to join me to talk about the Uruguayan Football Association's tumultuous 8-month tender process for its media rights, the first time that it has ever gone to market in an open tender. We'll dissect the details and find out how Uruguayan league football has tripled revenues, how long-term partner Tenfield may have dealt the country's cable operators a lethal blow, and what rights holders elsewhere could learn from the process. Finally, we'll round up the podcast with a few sneak peeks at what's coming our way in the weeks and months ahead, including FIFA World Cup betting rights, what might be next for Australia's Big Bash cricket, how Ferrari's Formula One team is seeing red over a new blue logo, and Lidl's middle aisle deal for a Dine streaming subscription. All this is coming your way in just a few moments. But before we start, we'd love to have your feedback on this episode. You can leave us your feedback on today's podcast in a review on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify platforms. Let us know if you like what you're hearing and what you'd like to know more about. So without further ado, let's move straight on to our first topic for the day. Now, the Australian Open starts in earnest on Sunday, so we're going to serve up a commercial overview of the first Grand Slam of the year. And to do that, I'm joined now by Maria Kolodova, senior reporter, and Martin Ross, global news editor here at Sport Business. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
Maria, it's been a very long time. I haven't spoken to you for weeks. I spoke to Martin yesterday, so he's old hat. How about you? I think the last time I had you on was probably early November. How have you been? How was your Christmas?
Christmas was good. Now back full steam ahead, trying to get all those deals reported, all those analysis stories done for Sport Business Media, just like we never left.
Maria, tell us which mega event you're currently following on the BBC and YouTube. Well, not at work, I presume.
Not at work, never at work. But the ISU European Championships are on at the moment. So figure skating. I'm a really big figure skating fan. It's my sort of shameful secret how much knowledge I have on the sport. Pre-Olympic Euros in 4 continents are always fun. So yeah, the Euros are on right now in Sheffield, actually, so not too far from where I am, where neither Martin nor Catherine are, in London. And then the 4 continents, which is everyone but Europe, are on. I think they start on the 21st of January in China. And then obviously we have the Olympics coming up too, so that'll be really fun.
And if it's Europeans, that means no Rika Kihira, who is the Japanese superstar, who is, I was about to say who's named after your dog, but it's the other way around. Your dog's named after her, I believe.
Our family dog is named after Rika Kihira, who actually recently switched to ice dance from singles, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, so she's not competing in the Euros.
Nice. We need to do an ISU podcast at some point. But
yeah,
let's put that in the diary.
Well, let's switch the focus from ice skating to tennis and right round the other side of the world, the Australian Open. But before we delve into the weeds of the commercial rights deal, Maria, Tennis Australia has been getting innovative as it, like any rights holder, looks to tap into a wider audience while trying not to cannibalize its media rights income. Its animated cartoon feed is one example. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I think this will be the 3rd year that they're doing their animated broadcasts. I think they're called AO Animated. Really, they took off last year. Their first year, I think, was a little more bare bones and didn't really, it wasn't viral. But last year, it was really all over social media. And it was really funny because I think people on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now were kind of saying, oh, Tennis Australia is doing this as a workaround so they can show their own content, as a workaround around media rights, where that's not what that is. And, we spoke to Tennis Australia last year for Sport Business Media and to kind of talk a little bit more about it. It's really just a way to drive up engagement, especially because, Australia is really far and not that many people can actually go to the tournament and watch in person. So it's just a way to kind of increase their online presence, to kind of have people talking about them doing something a bit different. And all the feeds, the cartoon feeds, they're made in-house. There's one guy, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, who makes them. So it's kind of a really cool thing that they do, but it's really not a way to cannibalize any sort of media rights deals.
We've heard occasionally little bits of grumblings, but not really. I mean, it's not, if you're watching that as your kind of main medium to watch the Australian Open, then you're in a pretty strange place. Given the betting streams of the tennis Grand Slams clearly coexist with the media rights deals, why shouldn't this? And that's, yeah, it's quite a fun way of watching. Hard one to explain without actually getting people to have a watch themselves.
Yeah, I think as a tennis fan, after a while, it's not really a substitute for the real thing. You watch it for a little bit and then you actually just want to watch the sport. But it's a really cool thing that they do, I think.
Another cool thing that they're doing, I think, is this where the amateurs are allowed to try and win a point off of some of the professionals. And that was covered in my local paper here, and it's been in the national papers as well. So that's the first time they've done that, I think, and it's making some waves here. So I think that's probably a pretty smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think the media value of that is the crucial thing. It's funny up here that it's getting written up as $1 million as in US dollar, whereas it's actually Australian $1 million, which is 668,000 US dollars and just under 500,000 pounds. But not small change. They did it last year, but it was only 60,000 Australian dollars. So there was far less interest and far less jeopardy. The one that happened this week, amateur Jordan Smith, New South Wales state champion, beat Joanna Garland, women's number 117 in the final. And it's pretty simple. It's 1 point. It is one serve, I think, for the professionals, but 2 serves for the amateurs. And they do a kind of coin toss or rock, paper, scissors to decide.
They do rock, paper, scissors, yeah.
To decide who serves. So quite a lot of them serve really kind of very sensible kind of serve just to make sure it gets in, although others maybe just go for it. It was shown, I think, globally on YouTube. I had a look. I think 263,000 watched the stream live or on demand, and then another 250,000 had watched. They'd put a video up for every point, which is, decent traffic to get. But then also 9 showed it in Australia. And but the story around that really is the media value. People who maybe don't watch the Australian Open tuned in all of a sudden. And it's really indicative of any kind of innovation that the slams, all rights holders across all sports are innovating clearly, but to engage younger viewers. But the slams particularly are looking, I think, at that week before the main round. Australian Open is doing so. The US Open, conjunction with IMG, did last year for the mixed doubles, sort of exhibition doubles, if you like, that were before the main round, which maybe a kind of mixed response. Yeah, doing anything they can. And it's also just more inventory as well that you can provide to broadcaster sponsors just on the inventory. Tennis Australia has traditionally, I think, but not always, kind of packaged everything up together. By everything, I mean they have now the United Cup, which Pitch International distributes around the world, which was the ATP Cup when it was just a men's event. But then also the 250s that they have, Brisbane, Canberra, Adelaide and Hobart, kind of summer of tennis content that goes in as a wider package. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think sometimes the deals are done maybe on a standalone basis, but there is a sort of bigger package of rights there.
Well, Maria, you are our so-called tennis expert, and you've written a lot about tennis in the past months and last couple of years. Can you take us through the major media rights deals that have been done in the last 12 to 18 months, and domestic rights as well, about the deal with Nine? Let us know how that's going.
So I can't take credit for too much of the Australian Open reporting. A lot of that has been our fearless leader, Imran Yusuf. But Tennis Australia, certainly they've been super busy over the past, forever. They're always busy, I'm sure. There have been a number of key deals that they did recently. I think maybe one of the biggest was Japan, their renewal with Wow that was done towards the end of last year. Japan is, I think, a really important market for Tennis Australia and the Australian Open. I think it accounts for quite a bit of their viewership. And, it's a pretty sizable deal. And obviously the time zone helps. Japan and Australia, are not too far away in time. And, there's, of course, a couple of Japanese big stars in tennis who've not been super consistent recently, but still have kind of served up, pardon the pun, a lot of interest with Naomi Osaka and Nishikori. That's a big deal that they did recently. There's also been a deal in India with Sony. There was a deal in South Korea, being renewed in MENA. So definitely a lot of deals done over the past year or so. They've not had to be super busy in Europe because they have their Warner Brothers Discovery deal that's 10 years long. It's going up until 2031, I believe. So that's fine on that end. And of course, their deal in the US with ESPN is obviously a big one because it's the US. And that one also, I believe, is currently set to run until 2031. It was interestingly one of the first Grand Slam deals in the US that was struck for this kind of current cycle that we're in for Grand Slams. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But yeah, they've been very busy internationally. And then, as you mentioned, Catherine, there's that domestic deal with Nine, and that's still got a few more years on it. I think it runs until 2029. So that'll be really interesting one to watch when it comes around, also because I think a good amount of Tennis Australia's deals actually run until that time. So it'll be a really busy time, I think, for them too.
Mm. Yeah, the timeline on domestic intrigues me. The last deal was done in 2022, running from 2025 to 2029, 425 million Australian dollars. That's not just rights fees. I think there's a lot of contra in there and TV ads and so on. With 9 networks, you've got to think that they must be preparing the ground for the next one in terms of the lead-in time you would need. So that's certainly a big one to keep an eye on. I think if we talk in a year's time ahead of 2027 Australian Open, that will be a topic right in the middle of discussion, but not my favorite deal has to be with WowWow. WowWow is my favorite name of any broadcaster. Well, there can be many broadcasters that you can just write the same emoji twice and you get the name of your broadcaster. So let's give the prize for best name in sports broadcasting to WowWow. Hats off to them.
Well said, Martin. Now, betting rights are also a strong revenue driver for any major tennis body in particular. And Tennis Australia have a new key agreement with Infront Better from last year, don't they, Maria?
Yeah, so obviously betting is massive in tennis, partly just because there's so much tennis throughout the year, between the slams and the ATP Tour and the WTA Tour and the ITF. There's just so much content, which is obviously massive for betting companies. So Sport Business reported exclusively last year that Tennis Australia was close to a deal with Infront Better. And that was interesting, especially after Infront had recently secured and then renewed their ITF rights, which was their first move into tennis. They're a pretty new player in the betting world, where there's been a lot of movement, some consolidation. So that's been really interesting from the betting rights side of things. But then it's also interesting because Tennis Australia, those betting rights were the only ones out of the slams that weren't tied into IMG Arena and now Sportradar through that deal. And so I think because of that, they were able to leverage that quite a lot and kind of really shop around, which I think raised that value. So I think that really helps them monetize those rights. And I think especially given what else they do with, the cartoon broadcasts and all that, it just kind of adds into it.
So the bigger picture, where does this leave Tennis Australia from a financial point of view? Martin, is it a rosy picture? Why is this topic of particular relevance at the moment? I think that's related to the thorny issue ongoing of many players as they battle for a greater share represented in the prize pot, right?
Yeah, that was the news item, obviously, before this year's event. A lot of the players were unhappy with the percentage that the prize pot represented of Tennis Australia revenues. The total prize money for this edition is 111.5 million Australian dollars, which is up 16% on last year. I think the men and women will receive 4.15. It's up 19%. So Tennis Australia have moved to sort of assuage concerns. I don't think it's completely made those concerns disappear among some players, but yeah, a chunky old prize pot. In terms of how much the revenues are, they haven't published, they do their accounts until the end of September, so the 24-25 figures aren't published yet by Tennis Australia. They don't provide a breakdown of, I believe, of media sponsorship, ticketing, etc. But Australian Financial Review did publish at the end of last year the figures that were provided by the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. So that was just shy of 700 million Australian dollars. First time I think they've ever exceeded 600 million. So that was in part because of the Nine deal, the TV deal, the first year of that taking effect. And then also just because it's such a huge fan occasion, the ticketing, etc., etc. That's a huge part of also the sponsorships in terms of just the access you get to people, fans on site. So, yeah, they made a 15.8 million net surplus. We've not seen the figures, but that's the report. So it's not like they are making a huge, like any rights holder, they have huge commitments they have to make to funding the grassroots game, all the innovation in Melbourne around the stadium infrastructure that there has been or that they plan to do. And along with also, production that they have to do, anything along those lines. So there's a massive amount of investment, which, dare I say it, a lot of the players might not have looked at in fine detail. And they'll have just looked at the headline figure and said, they get that X amount of revenue. Why are we not getting more for the prize pot? So That's why it's in the news at the moment. Yeah, let's see if it that dispute rumbles on in terms of share of overall revenue the players are getting. But player power in tennis has always been such a huge thing across all sorts of facets of the game. And this is just another example of it, really.
Right. We haven't talked about sponsorship yet. And of course, we should, given that it's a key factor. Can you two give me a flavor of the major developments in the sponsorship realm since Sinner and Keys were crowned singles champions last year?
Yeah, we are without our Tennis Australia sponsorship expert in Faiz Samadi, who is on holiday at the moment, but he's done a couple of pieces. I can give you some detail clearly, but I'll also refer you to a couple of pieces he's done. One was a data snapshot in November titled Broad Appeal Premium Feel Key to Tennis Sponsorship Growth. And also back in March did a piece on just the real kind of festival element of the fan culture, how that translates into not just the sponsorship deals, but also the activation of the deals. I mean, the heavy lifting is done, I suppose, by Kia as a major partner. They're locked in for another couple of years. I think their last deal was done a few 2023, I think the last deal. And then they have 4 associate partners, ANZ, Emirates, Rolex, and everybody's favorite Chinese Baiju brand, the Chinese spirit, which is Luxiao Laojiao. And sorry to the many people in China for my pronunciation. So yeah, those are the most recent one was ANZ, which became the official bank and moved into that second tier, supporting Kia, which is the major partner. So that was right at the beginning of this year. They are becoming the title sponsor of Show Court 3, which is the ANZ Arena now. And then also Emirates about a year ago renewed up until 2029. So that's locked in. Another big one, and I know we spoke a lot about Chinese electric goods and fridges. Haier, a chunky 7-figure deal, that one. Haier did a deal last year, I believe, to become a partner. So that's the section below, but I think that's a particularly juicy one. And then, yeah, there's been a bunch of lower tier kind of new deals, extended deals. First crypto sponsor, Nexo, which is kind of making moves into tennis. Lipton Iced Tea, which I'm a fan of. Chemist Warehouse, I'm kind of neutral about that. Bupa, and then Mecca, which is a beauty brand. Yeah, no idea who they are. There's a strong stable, clearly, of sponsors. There's a good broadcast footprint, and that's how it all fits in. Ticketing, we're not really, I suppose, going to have time to go to town on here, but yeah, clearly, like any slam and as popular as the Australian Open, ticketing is a massive one as well.
And this isn't really tournament related necessarily, but something that's been interesting in the tennis sponsorship world, in my view at least, is that there's been some players switching recently to Wilson, their apparel as well as their rackets. I think they're calling it 360 degrees or something like that. And Alex de Minaur, who's a big Australian player, is going to debut with Wilson for the first time, I think, at the Australian Open, or he might have already at all the run-up tournaments. So that's something to watch out for as well, I think, because there's a lot of those little tennis stories that are quite interesting. I don't write for sponsorship, so I'm not the expert, but those stories are always really interesting to me.
Tom Hanks' favourite tennis racket brand, that Wilson.
Yeah.
No, it's
I'm
not.
a Babolat guy personally, but...
No, it's a Castaway joke, but anyway.
Oh, sorry.
So,
not to worry.
The Australian Summer of Sport is obviously something they're very protective of because it's their corner of the calendar. And I suppose the billion-dollar question is, will the Grand Slams ever centralize? And how are they positioning themselves against Saudi attempts to overhaul the top tier of the game?
So the centralization thing in tennis is so interesting to me because it's been talked about for so long, and kind of every 6 months or so you read or you hear or we hear that there's been a development, there's been a new vote, there's been a new proposal and something like that. And it's funny because it just never seems to end. So it's like stuck in this bureaucratic nightmare of discussions and voting. I assume something will happen eventually, especially with the tours merging as well, or the possibility of that. But I think all 4 of the rights holders are very protective. You know, the Grand Slams are a big thing. They all have their own unique identity. They all have their own place in the sports calendar. They're all, very different in style and vibe. Australia is the party slam, and then you've got Wimbledon, which is kind of more sophisticated. And so, it's all very unique. And I think that's actually a pretty big barrier to centralization, let alone all the kind of commercial aspects of it. But, I think calendar is something that's quite sacred in sports. Sports fans know what happens at each point of the year and the month, and there's a lot of hurdles, I think. And I think we'll just kind of I don't know what Martin thinks. Maybe you don't agree with me, but I think it's one of those things we'll keep hearing about something, another discussion being had for a long time,
Yeah.
but nothing actually coming of it.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, because at no point does anybody draw a line in the sand and say, well, I'm going to stop doing my betting rights deal, or I'm not going to take these rights to market, or, well, let's not, I mean, at what point do you all say, or if you don't do that, then you have to get into the very difficult issue of compensation for existing individually negotiated deals. So we've seen that at the moment with the conversations around ATP and WTA, which are still going on. The issue, or the main issue clearly being distribution and who gets what and what level exposure have both been getting to, generate their own independent revenues. So it's really difficult when it's been publicly anyway driven by one side, which is ATP and Andrea Gaudenzi. We did mention this on the podcast after the IMG summit, that it was mentioned on stage. Andrea was there, Marina Storti was there, Danny Townsend from Surge was there. Nobody could give a clear indication of when centralization was going to happen. Certainly from the WTA side, they played it very sort of politically, as you'd expect. So, yeah, I mean, step by step, really. First, at the moment, we have the ATP WTA commercial merger, if it gets over the line first. But since we've first started hearing about it, I've never heard of any actual tangible progress being made in centralization discussions. So, long way to go. Can we get a prediction as to who's going to win? Who do we think is going to win?
The Australian Open?
Yes.
I mean, for the men, it'll be either Carlos or Yannick, but the women are fun because, there's always somebody new recently these days, it seems. You had Maddie Keys last year. I really like the Australian Open because it's the first one of the season, the first one of the year. It feels like really anything can happen, and there's always someone who makes a really deep run, like out of nowhere. Like, remember Ben Shelton's deep run? I think it was 2023. That was really fun. And so, there's a lot of crazy stuff. I feel like that happens more so than in the other slams, but maybe that's my bias.
I'm going to go for a late wildcard entry for Jordan Smith, and he's going to win in 5 sets in the final.
He's going to win in 5 in the final. Okay.
Yeah, TV viewing figures will be broken. I've kind of stopped tuning into the Australian Open and other slams since Sir Andy of Murray retired. I'm afraid I shouldn't say that, but it's very true.
We're going to get you back on there.
We do. We need to get me back. I need a new hero.
Or you can watch the Euros.
Yes, also that.
Right. Well, thank you, you two. It's always good to have you on. Martin, you'll be on later in the show. And Maria, I do hope we have you back very soon to give us your wisdom on the areas that you specialize in. We're going to be moving on in the next section to another Southern Hemisphere country, but one which also has implications and reverberations well beyond its borders. We will be right back after a short break.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sport business industry news and insight. I'm joined now by Jonathan Rest, our global news reporter, who's been off podcast duty for some weeks now. John, welcome back to the booth. What's new with you?
What's new? Oh, I'm trying to stay warm in the winter weather. I've recovered from Christmas, and now I'm going to the NBA basketball on Sunday. They're back in Europe. They're in Berlin on tonight, Thursday, and back in London on Sunday. And obviously, really interesting time as well with NBA with their European plans and stuff. So I've been kind of looking a little bit into that and looking forward to that game. So yeah, NBA's been keeping me busy.
Certainly exciting times with the NBA, with Real Madrid just saying that they would stay loyal to the EuroLeague, I bet. So there's lots going on there in that space, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, to the subject at hand, the recently concluded, or mostly concluded, tender for Uruguayan Football League media and sponsorship rights. And let me say right up front that while this might seem to be a discussion about a very specific process in a very small country, the results have implications that could be valuable learnings for other rights holders and associations around the world, especially in countries that are as connected as Uruguay in terms of 5G mobile connections and fiber to the home, of which Uruguay is really a leader in the Americas. Now, John, we've both written about the tender process led by the AUF, the Uruguayan Football Association, and its erstwhile exclusive agency partner, Paco Casals Tenfield. You started looking at it last spring when the AUF opened an exclusive negotiating period with Tenfield, right? And this kicked off a tumultuous 8 months. Tell us how it started, and then I'll tell you how it's going.
Yeah, I think I wrote about 12 stories on this in 2025, and the story only started in April. And I guess there's kind of 8 key dates in the diary last year that gets us to where we are now. And as you say, it's spring. It started really in April. And now Tenfield have been a partner of the AUF, the Uruguayan Football Association, since 1999. So this is a long-term relationship. Their deal was due to end at the end of the 2025 season, or end of 2025, the calendar year. So in April, the FA wrote to Tenfield and said, okay, we're ready to start talking over a new cycle, which would be 26 to 29. Then we got to the point in June where actually we had to have a court battle for this. The AUF had to go to CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, allowing it to negotiate with Tenfield directly. There was a group of clubs, 9 of them in the top league, led by big ones, Penarol, Liverpool, Wanderers, that said, we collectively as a clubs body want to be negotiating this deal, not the FA. The FA won, so that enabled them to stick with Tenfield. We're now in kind of late June. Tenfield make their first bid to the FA. It falls well short of the valuation that the AUF had come up with. In total, there are around 2 bids that got submitted. We're now the 4th of July. That deadline passed. That meant that if no agreement was made by the 4th of July, the AUF could go to a tender, could go to market. Now, it's never done this. This was a landmark moment in Uruguayan football. They basically, the reason being there are 180 days left until the end of the year, and that was the period of time in which the AUF were able to go to market. So that then spent most of July kind of working out how they were going to position the packages. Now we're into August. Tenfield then threatened legal action. Nothing quite like legal action in South American football. It needs to be done on all tenders. So basically the AUF had said, well, we're going to go to market and we're going to have multiple packages. And Tenfield were like, no, you can't do that. We've got a matching clause. That doesn't allow you to do that. Well, undeterred, AUF decide in September, no, we are going to split our rights up in different ways. Tenfield gets its matching clause, included. We're now up to the 7th key date. We're in October now. AUF goes to market, and then early November, the bids are due, first round bids, and we're in January now, and this thing has only really got properly kind of sorted, obviously, as your excellent media piece, Catherine, this week, that's kind of dived into everything that happened and the numbers. So kind of that's the backstory of a fascinating, as you say, very small market, really, very passionate football market, but also one that just kind of was this landmark moment where, and it's kind of people around the world be listening to this thinking, in transparent markets where you have to have tenders. This was a big, big deal in Uruguayan football for the clubs, for the FA themselves, for Tenfield as well, to have legitimate competition. So that's the kind of backstory. But actually, we're going to, because you wrote the story, I'm going to flip it a little bit. And actually, I'm going to put some questions to you for a change. And I guess your piece, I'd advise all listeners that have access to Sport Business Media to read it or pay for access to Sport Business Media so you can read it. What did the tender look like in the end?
Well, it was a very exciting process when they read out the bids. This was in early December when they received all the envelopes, and they did a live YouTube discussion. It was over an hour of the president of the federation, Ignacio Alonso, opening each envelope and reading out what it was and what the offers were. And there were 17 bids, so it took a while. I think it was an hour and 20 minutes. But in any case, the AUF had divided the tender into 3 separate blocks, and the key one and the one that commanded the highest in revenues, the highest base fees, was Block 1, which was in turn divided into 6 different sub-packages or lots. And the first 3 of those, it's getting complicated, the first 3 covered the media rights. The first one was free-to-air and pay TV rights, the second one was streaming rights, and the third was international rights. Now, the AUF set base fees for those 3 packages that were well over double what Tenfield had been paying over the last cycle. Bear in mind that they had held exclusive rights to all of these packages for the last 25 years, basically. Now, in the last cycle, they've been paying $17 million for all the media rights, including international. And in this new tender, the combination of free-to-air and pay plus streaming plus international commanded a base fee of over double, of around 35 million. And so the interesting thing is that a lot of people had said, there were a lot of strong responses. They said, there's no way, that's far too much. One senior executive whose company was involved in the bidding process and whose company tabled a bid told me that the base fees were exorbitant. He said the Uruguayan league was small and inconsequential, strong words, There's only 2 big clubs. There's no international notoriety. In short, it's a very limited product. And the key thing that he said is because of those conditions, it was a mistake to split the rights into pay TV and streaming packages with neither of those areas getting exclusivity. And he said, as a final comment, he said, it's not the NBA, you know.
Well, fair. Yeah, I mean, as you say, like we've kind of you've looked at the numbers as well. Who won the key packages? I mean, obviously Tenfield are still involved. They had the matching clause, as we said, throughout. So, that relationship hasn't totally ended, but it's very different to the relationship that they had with the federation. So who won what? And I guess more importantly, how much in total is AUF getting?
Well, I think at first glance, it looks like the AUF appears to have had the last word. They received 17 offers from 13 different bidders, including 6 different offers for the key media rights packages, and they secured far more in the end than anyone ever thought possible. Their base fee for the domestic free-to-air, pay TV, streaming, and international rights combined was $36.5 million. And in the end, from 3 different bidders, they will earn $52.4 million. So that's a significant increase in what they really expected in their wildest dreams. And when you add in the other packages, there was sponsorship, there was betting, there were the other competitions like the Cup and women's football and amateur competitions. And then there was something in-stadium advertising, although we're not very clear on how that fits in. But the total they will get per season for the next 4 years is $67.5 million. And it's all done in dollars in Uruguay. And that's well over 3 times what they earned in the previous deal, in their deal with Tenfield. So 3 key media rights lots. The cable rights were won by a consortium operated by DirecTV and Torneos. And DirecTV currently is the leading pay TV platform in Uruguay with, listen to this, 120,000 subscribers. So it's not huge. And Torneos, of course, is the Argentinian agency, and both of those share a parent company in Grupo Vertain, the Argentinian conglomerate. The streaming rights were won originally by the state-owned telco Antel in partnership with Disney Plus and the Sport Media Agency. But Tenfield came out and used its matching rights and took that package. So they have the streaming rights. And then among the other bidders who were successful, MediaPro Uruguay beat Sport Radar for the betting rights. And a group led by Clarín, the Argentinian media company, won the final media rights package to the Cup, women's football, futsal, beach soccer, and amateur rights. Tenfield also won packages for sponsorship and in-stadium advertising. And there were a couple other minor packages that were also won. So I think the key point here is that the AUF, the association, has essentially taken back control of all its rights, and it now moves into a central administrative role, managing partnerships with 6 new partners. And in the end, it will distribute a far higher share of media rights from its vastly improved package to the 31st and 2nd division clubs. So it sounds like everything's great, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Interesting that, Tenfield have also got the in-stadium rights because they have been close to the clubs over the years. One of the clubs I mentioned earlier, Penarol, who were against the federation even doing this deal, they wanted to do it themselves. And now them and Nacional are going to end up with 4 times as much revenue from their media rights. So they'll be delighted, actually. We've covered, as a team, Sport Business Media, as a team, have covered hundreds of league rights sales processes over the years. But this one did seem kind of some fascinating, kind of extraordinary parts of it. You mentioned at the start there about kind of just, an hour-long YouTube program, and there was some kind of confusion over one of the package winners, right? There was a little bit of colour in this process.
There certainly was. The Block 2 cover of the tender covered the host broadcasting and production rights for, I think it was 300 first division matches, 264 second division matches, and 39 cup matches. So that's a lot of matches. And it also included VAR technology for the selection of those matches. Well, now that was originally awarded to La Corte, which is a well-known Argentinian production company, and then Tenfield matched it. So they had the production, but then it emerged after Ernst & Young, who were the consultants to the AUF, they found out that the La Corte bid had not included the VAT, value-added tax. So they went back to the drawing board, realized that they'd made a grave error, that's what they said, and they awarded the rights, that package to do the production to DirecTV Torneos, who had actually put in a lower bid. And bear in mind that this is a cost to the federation. They pay for production, so they were looking for the lowest bid. And so when you factored in or factored out the VAT, DirecTV Torneos' bid was lower. And so Tenfield had been given, well, at first it seemed to be 12 days, but now it's going on later in January. They've been given a lot of time to match that deal. They, as far as I know, and I've been scouring the news sources and talking to people, they haven't come out and matched it yet. And that's largely because to produce, hundreds of games for a lower fee, is there a business in that? Will they have any margins? They produce some matches, but they also hire out production to third-party companies. So it's difficult to make money on that part of the deal.
Yeah, there'll be people listening to this that, production companies who will well know about the dangers of people cutting under their costs and stuff like that. It's a tough business. This, though, you're kind of looking at your piece, this was the first ever open, transparent tender for AUF. It produced record-breaking revenues, as you've touched on, and yet there are some people, some market experts saying that there's problems here. What are those problems? Can you shed some light on what they might mean?
Well, there will be proof in the pudding when it all starts happening over the next months and years. But it's becoming clear, and there were people who pointed this out earlier, that there could be some serious bumps in the road now that they've split their rights across different platforms without awarding exclusive packages to either of them. What's emerging is that the AUF now has two competitors within its own business. It's got cable and streaming, neither with any exclusivity. And the cable industry in Uruguay, like in many countries around the world, is in decline, while streaming is a real growth area. And there's a feeling that streaming, which is cheaper, it's cheaper to sign up to a streaming package, it's more accessible, everybody has it on their phone, it could actually cannibalize the cable sector by pushing prices down, taking away subscribers. And the interesting thing in this is that Tenfield is paying virtually the same for the streaming rights as it paid for the whole lot before. And it could actually do some real damage to the cable industry by putting everything on streaming. I think we should look at the stats in Uruguay. It's actually one of the most connected countries in the Americas. It's very small. There's 3.5 million people, 1.65 million households. And of those 1.65 million households, there's only just over 400,000 pay TV subscribers. That's about 30% penetration. And subscriber numbers have been falling significantly over the past decade, really. So pretty much everyone in Uruguay has mobile internet with 5G. Most households have high-speed fiber to the home services. And almost everybody has at least one OTT service, Netflix being the market leader. So Tenfield haven't said how they're going to show their matches on streaming, but people in the market say it's very likely that they will seal a deal with Fix, which is a new streaming service that launched last summer and with which Tenfield already have some business deals in place, I think, with technology. Now, Fix is an OTT service. It's carried on Antel, the state telco's streaming platform as well. So it looks like that could be where Tenfield streaming matches will go. And I think another really key development is just, I think 10 days ago now, Tenfield shut down its two cable channels, VTV and VTV Plus. Now, these two channels were among the most watched cable channels in the country for years, and that's where they showed Uruguayan League football. So those have been taken away from the cable operators who depended on them to drive subscriptions. And so they'll now be streaming channels. They're available on Antel. They may fold this in with Fix. Well, we're yet to find out. But what's important here is that VTV and VTV Plus, well, up to the end of December, had not just AUF football, but they had the top-tier domestic basketball league, they had domestic motorsport, boxing, cycling, and they had one of the most watched events of the year, which is the Montevideo Carnival Parade, one of the biggest and oldest parades in the world. Bet you didn't know that.
I didn't.
So they are depriving cable of these key events that everybody in Uruguay watches, and they're reserving them for streaming. So yeah. I think the point is that these cable operators now don't have those two channels with all their exclusive content. And Tenfield's masterstroke in all this has been to move all that premium content away from cable and onto streaming. And now it's going to add domestic football to that. So I think what observers have been saying is that the AUF may come to regret not selling pay TV rights as a single package, or at least not awarding exclusive packages within those to their customers.
Yeah, and it seems that they've done this whole kind of year-long sales process, and still Tenfield have come out as the ones calling the shots. Really, the final question I think is quite interesting. Just we write about the industry globally. Every country is of interest to us. I'm just wondering, and I think you probably touched on it there. What lessons do you think can be learned from similar-sized leagues or sports properties in similar-sized market around this sales process? Because you kind of alluded there, and again, point people to your media piece and just some of the infographics, the data charts. It's almost like the death of cable, right? This could be kind of quite an interesting test case in Uruguay as to what could happen elsewhere.
It really is. I mean, if you look at the results of the tender, the winners of the cable package, DirecTV Torneos, they're paying $31.5 million for the free-to-air and cable rights, and Tenfield's only paying $17 million for its streaming rights. And I'm not quite sure how they can make a business. They know more than I do, but how they're going to make a business out of showing all these matches on a non-exclusive basis to a subscriber base of around 400,000, just over. That has been falling by 13% last year on year, 15% the year before. So it sort of begs the question of what's going to happen with the cable industry in this very connected country when everybody has the ability to watch a cheap streaming package on their phone or on their high-speed broadband at home. And I think there's already been one fallout from this whole process in another country, in Mexico. It came out today that Sky Sports, which are two very popular sports channels, which show La Liga, Bundesliga, Formula One, those two channels they're cable channels. They are going to be shut down, all the workers dismissed and so forth, because Izzy, which is a streaming platform, is taking all the premium content. They're all owned by the same company, Televisa Univision, but they're shutting down these cable channels because the Izzy streaming service is doing so much better. It's a growth area. Nobody's subscribing to cable anymore. And so they're just going to put all the rights onto Izzy, which already shows sport. And I think that's I think we're going to see an avalanche of things like that happening around the world.
Yeah. Well, these rights in Uruguay are, we're told, sold till 2029. But knowing South American football, Catherine, I think we'll both be writing more stories about this in the coming months, I'm sure. I don't think this is quite the end of it yet.
No, I'm looking forward to it. It's terribly exciting observing what goes on in these countries. And Uruguay is one of the most. It's a very democratic, very peaceful, very open and transparent country. It's quite wealthy. People are educated. It's an interesting test case. I think it's much more European than a lot of other countries in Latin America. So we will watch this space, won't we, John?
We will. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much for coming on and lending your wisdom. That was great fun. And we'll be keeping all our readers up to date with what goes on in Uruguay and beyond in the coming weeks. We're going to take a break now before we come back for the final section of the Sport Business Podcast. We'll be right back.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to this final section of the Sport Business Podcast, where we take a look at notable events happening in the coming weeks. Martin and John have come back to join me for this section. Welcome, gentlemen, back to the show. And what are you looking ahead to for the coming weeks? Who's going to start? Martin.
Oh, okay.
Go on then.
I'm pushing the boundaries of coming weeks. It's the World Cup. There was quite a big deal announced this week. John wrote about it. Stats Perform got the betting rights to the World Cup, which is, a big announcement for Stats Perform, which we've talked about them before a little bit, about various changes they've been going through. But interestingly, it's the first time that betting websites can, legally anyway, will be live streaming video from the FIFA Men's World Cup, I believe. FIFA dabbled with this last year at the Club World Cup in a deal with Sport Radar. They've had a lot to weigh up, and I know John will come in maybe on the FIFA Plus side of things, which came into this in terms of why FIFA's done it. It's quite a rarity, and I know it got a lot of traction on X, and a lot of people were saying, FIFA's after the money again. I mean, that's nonsense in this respect, because as we know, most rights holders of all levels, sell their betting data, betting video, big old market. English Premier League still doesn't sell betting video, but has a very lucrative betting data rights deal as part of Football Data Co., which Genius has. But FIFA's been one of the big exceptions. UEFA was one of the big exceptions until 2021. They did a deal with Sport Radar, and it's really just allaying fears, yes, over match fixing and integrity, I suppose, and being aligned with the betting sector, but also whether it cannibalizes your media rights in any way. So interesting that FIFA's taken the plunge. And John, yeah, it's partly to do with FIFA Plus and all the output that it has.
Yeah, I think the headline, wasn't it, everyone looked at was the World Cup and the Women's World Cup as well in 27. But actually, I think FIFA are quite keen that this is seen as part of the FIFA Plus integrity as well. That, you know, they are streaming matches from a lot of low-level leagues around the world. There have been excellent reports out there, investigations into the fact that some of these games on FIFA Plus are being picked up by kind of illegal betting operators and being streamed. So this kind of should help clamp down on that by ensuring that, you know, only kind of licensed bookies are able to carry this content. So I think that's quite an important kind of add-on to what everyone's looking at, which is obviously the World Cup.
There, Catherine, you see, we can be serious during these sections as well. There we go.
I know. I'm surprised. Usually we're talking about things that are a bit obscure and quite humorous. So well done.
That's still to come.
Good on you. Yeah, good. Good start. John, you had something to look ahead to, didn't you?
Yeah, a bit closer than Martin's, because he's still got his. Well, if you're watching the video, you can see he's got his Scotland kind of logo behind him. He's so excited for the World Cup. He's already.
It's not a Scotland logo. This is a Scotland tea towel, the Lion Rampant, signed by Rivaldo at the 1998 World Cup, and in a very leading brasserie in Paris.
Well, going back to my point, Martin's excited for that. He's already. I'm
accepting bids. I'm accepting bids.
He's already packed his bag and got his passport. No, the Big Bash League final is the 25th of January. I think most England cricket fans have had enough of cricket in Australia, but it's a big one in the sense that what comes next. I've just done a piece this week on The Money, our sports finance newsletter we talked about it on a podcast some months ago about Cricket Australia opening up to the likelihood of opening up to private equity in the Big Bash. And there's a big debate going on among the 8 teams in Australia as to how much they should sell and where that money goes. And I think once the Big Bash final finishes in the next week or so, I think those talks are really going to escalate over the next quarter to get some kind of agreement in place for probably not, next year's tournament, but certainly 2027. So I think, that's my kind of, look ahead is firstly that final from a sporting perspective, and then what's going to happen with the Big Bash as they look to kind of get that on a par with the IPL globally.
And there's been talks about private equity entering the New Zealand cricket market as well, hasn't there? So it's all change down under. Or it could be.
I mean, that was a discussion that led to, we're not privy to those conversations, but led to the exit of the CEO of New Zealand cricket as well. I think there was some debate around whether that was the right way forward. New Zealand cricket are already investing in Major League Cricket in the US. There's been talk, there's part of the discussions around the future of the Big Bash League has involved expansion from 8 to potentially 10 teams, New Zealand being a potential kind of new franchise. And, all these conversations are ongoing at the same time. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting kind of area to watch over the next 12 months.
Yes, we'll carry on watching that space. And speaking of that space, other spaces, what else are you looking at for the sport business? Martin, you had something, any other business?
I do. There's a bit of beef in the F1 world. I wouldn't describe it as a tomahawk steak, more of a filet mignon. Just a little bit of beef between, it's a bit one way. Antoine Lunel, who's the chief marketing officer at Revolut, who's a big sponsor of Audi, made some quite funny comments on the Business of Sport podcast. Who knew that there was another podcast talking about the business of sport? But anyway, he made them a few days ago in reference to HP, Hewlett-Packard's title deal with Ferrari, which Matt Williams, our very own Matt Williams, got their scoop on in April 2024, and they became title naming rights sponsor of Ferrari beginning of last season. But anyway, he's claiming that Ferrari's basically spoiled its car's livery by having the blue logo of HP on it. It's just quite unusual to have a bit of mudslinging. And he said on aforementioned podcast, how can you put blue on a red car? And then he said, no offense. And I love it when people say no offense. It's like when British people say, I don't mean to be rude. They then follow up with something extremely rude. So he said, no offense, but I think that what HP and Ferrari have done to their cars is not good from a design perspective. How can you put blue in a red car? This is not good. He did say that MasterCard and McLaren, he says that looks good from a brand point of view. And of course, Audi and Revolut looks fantastic in his words. But it was funny. It reminded me of a very different story around a blue logo back in the early 90s when Celtic, when they were very much struggling at the time, did a shirt sponsorship deal with a car dealership called People's. which shows you how much they were struggling, that they were doing shirt deals with car dealership. And it had a very, very small blue Ford logo on it, which caused absolute uproar, as you can imagine, given the Rangers connotations. And this was well before the days of social media. And the sponsorship did last its course. But yeah, you got to be careful with your colours and your logos. And not sure how Ferrari hardcore fans feel about it, but one of the rivals wasn't a fan.
Wow. Gosh. Well, John, you've got something to add to this, don't you?
I'm going to take you shopping to Middle Lidl. Everyone loves a Middle Lidl, whatever you can buy. Well, in Germany, there's a bargain to be had in the Middle Lidl. You can get a subscription to Dine, the streaming platform, for as little as €9.99 per month, rather than $19.50 per month. So if you've got a Lidl Plus app, you can go in and you can get your subscription. Now, the reason, obviously, behind this is that they are both partly owned by the Schwarz Group. So they own Lidl, and they have I think it's a 42.5% stake in Dine. They came on board last year along with the DFL, the German league. So yeah, you can watch the handball Euros, which I think start on the 15th of January, I believe. Dine have got every game in Germany, and so you can go and buy you might be able to buy a tomahawk steak actually in the Middle Lidl, and then get your subscription as well.
That's good news for Dine. Every little helps. I think we're mixing our supermarket metaphors. Did you know, before we go, quiz question, why is it called Lidl?
Ooh, I've never thought of that. Go on. You got to tell us.
So,
can't even guess.
It's called Lidl after Ludwig Lidl, who's a retired school teacher and painter. So, Dieter Schwarz, John also mentioned the Schwarz Group, who have equity in Dine. So when they launched, I think he was the son of the original founder. When he launched the discount supermarket store in the 70s, he didn't want to use Schwarzmarkt, because in German that means black market. So he originally founded the company in 1930 to sell fruit on a wholesale basis with Anton Lidl. And I haven't been able to get to the bottom of this, but there was some dispute that prevented them from using his name for the supermarket chain that they then launched in the 70s in Germany. So he ended up buying IP rights from a retired school teacher called Ludwig Lidl in the 70s for 1,000 Deutschmarks. And that's why it's called Lidl.
How do you come up with this stuff? Where do you find it?
I don't know. I talked to a lot of people in dodgy supermarkets in the fruit aisle.
Well, I guess on that happy note, I think we should wrap up our podcast for the week here. Thank you to Maria, who came on before, our resident tennis expert, and our media piece on Uruguay goes out today. So go there for deeper insight and numbers, and we'll be bringing you more updates on that situation as it evolves. And for now, we've come to the end of our second podcast of 2026. We'll be back again next week at the same time, same place. We'll see you all then. To our listeners, if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. And as always, if you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. Please don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. And watch out for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, also leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, and for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.